The Underground Railroad to Canada was initiated by the resistance of an enslaved woman named Chloe Cooley, who lived in the Niagara region of Upper Canada, or Ontario. In March 1793, her master, Adam Vrooman, sold her to slave buyers in New York State. Two men, Peter Martin, a black man, and William Grizzly, a white man, witnessed the removal of Chloe Cooley from the province. They noted that Vrooman tied up his slave woman with a rope, beat her, manhandled her, threw her in a boat, and with the help of associates, rowed her across the Niagara River into New York State, where he sold her to slave buyers. The two men also noted that Cooley screamed violently and made resistance. She fought off Vrooman and his henchmen, but to no avail. Yet it was her screams that brought them to witness her dehumanization and empowered them to take the matter to Governor Simcoe and two members of his cabinet. The governor had recently arrived from England and was surprised to see how deeply rooted slavery was in the new colony he was sent to administer. He moved to end the practice, but was not successful because of the slaveholding opposition in the government. In other words, many of the cabinet and assembly members were slaveholders, and they opposed Simcoe's action to end slavery. He then introduced another bill, and this bill was to limit slavery in the province. This piece of legislation was titled "The Act to Prevent the Further Introduction of Slaves and to Limit the Term of Contracts or Servitude within this province." And it was passed in the Upper Canadian Parliament on 9th July 1793, but it was a compromise piece of legislation. It did not end slavery, it did not free the slaves. It allowed for the gradual but not immediate abolition of slavery. And this act, this piece of legislation, had three main clauses. The first clause, repeal the Importation Act of 1790. In 1790, the Imperial Parliament in London passed this act that gave authority to slave owners anywhere within the British Empire to come to British North America with their slave property without any kind of taxation. They wouldn't have to pay any tax on their slave property. Come to British North America. So the first clause in Simcoe's legislation repealed that piece of legislation and banned the importation of slavery. The second clause confirmed the status of enslaved blacks within the colony, meaning July 1793, after 9th July, if you're a slave, you're going to remain a slave. The third clause in this piece of legislation gave freedom to children of slave mothers upon their 25th birthday. So after 9th July 1793, if you had a child, that child would continue as a slave until his or her 25th birthday. It was the first clause, the clause that banned the importation of slaves, that impinged directly on the creation of the Underground Railroad. For not only would it slow the growth of slavery in the colony, it would also mean that any foreign slave entering Upper Canada would immediately be free. In other words, touching the soil of Upper Canada guaranteed the freedom of any foreign slave. How did news of Upper Canada as a site of freedom for foreign slaves spread? Well, through a number of ways. First, through the grapevine. Merchants, travelers, diplomats, and other people in the know who moved between British North America and the United States took news of this to enslaved people. Secondly, African Americans who fought in the War of 1812 for the American Republic took this news back to the United States. And they would say to their slave brethren, look, if you can reach Upper Canada, you would be free. Ironically, enslaved blacks within the province, as mentioned, remain in their status as slaves. If they wanted freedom, they would have to escape to such states as Michigan and Ohio and other places in the old Northwest that had prohibited slavery. Thus, by 1818, we know that Upper Canada was this destination for runaway American slaves, especially sites along the Windsor and Niagara border region. We know this. We know this as a fact because J.C. Brown, among numerous other commentators, J.C. Brown was first an enslaved and then a free black from Louisville, Kentucky, spoke about this in Benjamin Drew's book, The North Side View of Slavery. And he notes that by 1818, many Kentuckians, free blacks and enslaved blacks who were contemplating their freedom, thought of Texas, which was not yet a part of the United States, or Upper Canada. And J.C. Brown himself had worked for the American Republic during the War of 1812 as a fifer. He was a young boy at that time. So people started migrating to Upper Canada. And as a result of these migrations from Kentucky and other states like Maryland and Virginia, the Underground Railroad began to grow. Another impetus that led to the growth of the Underground Railroad was the passage of the American Fugitive Slave Code of February 1793. This slave code empowered slave owners or their agents to seize and capture their runaway property. The Chloe Cooley incident happened in March of 1793. The Simcoe legislation was passed in July of 1793. So it is likely that Simcoe and his legislators were influenced positively by the American Fugitive Slave Act. So 1793 was an important year in North America for slavery and anti-slavery. A final and perhaps the most important reason for the growing activity on the Underground Railroad was the agency of enslaved African Americans. No Underground Railroad would have happened if these people did not have the courage, determination, and tenacity to make a run for their freedom. Such an act was dangerous and could lead to the loss of life and limb. But for them, slavery was infinitely worse. Therefore, by 1830, there were sizable black communities in Upper Canada in such places as Toronto, Windsor, Hamilton, Chatham, Amherstburg, Guelph, St. Catharines, and other places. Other important sites of Underground Railroad population were Montreal in Lower Canada, Fredericton and St. John in New Brunswick, and Halifax in Nova Scotia.